Lord. So when I was an exchange student, well, actually, when I was in college, I studied for a semester in Paris. And Paris is beautiful, anytime. And at the time, I was a student, which meant I had no money. So if I wanted to do anything, it was walking, free, or student prices, which was like basically nothing. So one of the things you could do as a student was you could go to any of the arts houses, the opera house, the museums, the concert halls, and take part in, part of the audience for any of these performances. However, it was usually standing room only. And so a bunch of us went to see Rudolph Nureyev dance. And we got there very early. We were up in the balcony, and we managed to save ourselves seats right along the railing. And then we all took off and went elsewhere for like 2 hours, because that's how it worked. We'd get there really early and camp out, and then we came back. And so from the front row balcony, probably from here to the street corner, it wasn't like it was really close. There was Nureyev on stage. So when I think of the word grace, I see that man flying through the air. I've never known anyone to leap off the ground and hang suspended before he went down. It was an amazing, amazing thing. And when we think of the word grace, a lot of times we think of being graceful, right? And what is being graceful? Being graceful is being smooth and at ease and with poise and simply expressing life in a greater way. Now, the word grace is also the basis of the word gracious. Holiday season is coming. Most of you will either be hosting or going to parties. And, the rule of the hostess is to be gracious. And what does gracious mean? It means to be welcoming and accepting. Right? It means to open to receiving the gift of the person who walks over the threshold or sits down at the table or sits next to you. It means to be aware of whatever needs you might be able to fulfill with the gifts that you bring and the service in your heart. So this idea of grace is more than just saying a prayer and asking for a favor, hoping that it will fall down upon you and be bestowed. That's a very Old Testament definition of grace, is that if you do things exactly right, God will bestow grace upon you. You can't really earn it, but obviously if you're bad, you're not going to get it, so you probably kind of sort of, did anybody else have this problem trying to figure out the word grace? Yeah. There were some kind of like unwritten rules that I never quite got a handle on. In the old days we used to call kings your grace. Why? Because kings had the power to bestow or deny favor. But what I'm going to suggest to you is that grace is not about favor. Grace is actually our natural state. It's not something that happens to us. And this began to evolve even in biblical teachings with the coming of Moses. So Moses came to free his people from Egypt. And he brought the law. He brought spiritual law to the people, which they really hadn't had any awareness of before. And the idea was that there are these spiritual laws and commandments that will lead you to living a better life, a more abundant life. So looking at Joel Goldsmith, he wrote a book called Spiritual Interpretation of the Scriptures. And he says, in the Bible we find Hebrews under Pharaoh in a state of ignorance, poverty, and bondage. And into this blackness came Moses with the promise of a better land. Under Moses, the Hebrews experienced a greater area of land, more fertile land on which to live, a greater freedom of physical movement, and they also enjoyed a freer sense of religious worship and a more abundant supply. All of this represents a greater degree of human good. So by bringing the law, Moses was increasing his people's experience of greater human good. Moses represents that type of leadership which leads the unilluminated human thought out of sense slavery into human good. In his teaching, Moses did not enter the promised land or spiritual consciousness. He never went beyond human level. So Moses brought the law, and in doing that, he lifted up the people into a new way of thinking that says, you know what, we don't have to be slaves. We don't have to be in bondage. We don't have to be in poverty. We don't have to live in sickness and in stress and in worry. But he never got to the promised land. And what is that promised land? You know, what is that space beyond the betterment of human good? It's Christ consciousness. It's the spiritual knowing of wealth and abundance and freedom. It's love and law, as Ernest Holmes teaches. Beyond the law, there is also love. And love is what gives us an expansiveness and a growth that goes beyond the safety railings, so to speak, of what the law gives us. Before the advent of truth or of metaphysical healing in your own experience, you were in a darkened state of thought, without spiritual illumination, without higher understanding. And in this dark sense, you were in bondage to physical pain and pleasure, to lack of peace and security, often in slavery to fear, sin, and disease. To you, Moses came as a promise of metaphysical healing, which was to lift you above the errors of sense, the same evils that bound the ancient Hebrews. In your case, as in the history of old, the promise was fulfilled with a better sense of health, supply, and freedom. And isn't that what we do here in every class, on every Sunday, in every talk, in every practitioner session? We're looking to have a more expansive sense of life, a more liberated sense of freedom and expression every day. Every day. No doubt, many inharmonious physical and financial conditions disappeared to give place to physical conditions of harmony and increase. This was your Moses promise being fulfilled with greater human good, and during this period of human improvement, you, just like the Hebrews of old, were under the law. The Ten Commandments, the church laws, the rules and restraints, all these are necessary under the progressive steps with Moses. Moses, in your case, is the first promise in your consciousness of a better life. So we have to start out by understanding, first of all, that life can be better. And the way life is better for us is in the way that it shows up in our experience. And most of us come to this teaching looking for a sense of healing in the way we feel. We just want to feel better about life. We don't want to stress. We don't want to worry. We don't want to struggle. We don't want everything to be a struggle. And by the way, it'd be really nice if we had a couple creature comforts. Let's be honest. You know, because we're promised that if we do things in a spiritual way, we will be taken care of. And to me, being taken care of means not being uncomfortable all the time, which is how my life seemed before this teaching. So Goldsmith's point here is that you can go beyond that human, physical, material experience. He says, when Christ dawns in consciousness, you are under grace. You're no longer righteous because there's a law decreeing it. You're not good because there's a regulation requiring it. You're not healthy because of some mental juggling. I know how to juggle mentally. Nor wealthy because of some miracle statements. You are, through Christ, the ever-present Spirit of God, lifted to Christ consciousness in Christ. So it's not that we have to go out there looking for our good. We begin to understand that it is already